Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. You're watching the only breakfast show live from Westminster. Today, the former Prime Minister David Cameron says he will respond positively to any investigation into his links with the financier Lex Greensill. And as surge testing begins in a third London borough after the South African variant was detected there, a suggestion that airborne transmission needs to be monitored more closely to stem the spread of coronavirus. More on all of that in just a moment. Also today, how to make sure you're still in the driving seat when you're working from home. We'll talk to the woman who recreated the office environment from the limited comfort of her car. That's at 8:40. And also for you,
45 packages today. We've got 3 hours to deliver them with a cheeky snippet of my song in between each one. I'm sure we can manage.
At 8:50, a different type of gig economy. We'll talk to the musician who delivered a song as well as Amazon parcels in an effort to promote his new single. It's Thursday, the 15th of April. Under scrutiny, David Cameron says he will respond positively to inquiries into his connections to the Lex Greensill capital issue. Airing their concerns, doctors say pubs and restaurants must improve ventilation as they warn more should be done to prevent the airborne transmission of COVID-19. The civilian ceremony. Reports suggest none of the royal family will wear military uniforms at the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh on Saturday. Protests for a fourth night in Minneapolis after a police officer is charged with the killing of an unarmed black man just a few miles from where George Floyd died. Making these women visible. Sky News meets the illustrator painting portraits of the 118 women killed by men in the UK over the last year.
Good morning. High pressure dominating our weather for the next few days, so plenty of sunshine to come, but it remains rather chilly, so gardeners take note, frosty nights.
A very good morning to you. David Cameron says he will respond positively to any investigation into his links with the financier Lex Greensill. The former Prime Minister is accused of lobbying ministers on behalf of Greensill when it was trying to access government COVID loans. Now, the company subsequently collapsed, leaving thousands of jobs under threat. A spokesman for Mr Cameron said he was keen that lessons are learned. Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Rob Powell, who's here. Finally getting some more comment from David Cameron as the pressure from Labour to really look into this is continuing to pile up.
Yeah, and while that broader inquiry that Labour were calling for yesterday, while that didn't get through, while that was blocked by Tory votes, actually it may not matter because there are already a number of investigations that will be going on. There's this lawyer-led review commissioned by Boris Johnson, but then at least two committees of MPs, so the cross-party groups that scrutinise government but also look into other issues as well. They've indicated that they will be looking into this. So I think there'll be ample opportunity for David Cameron to come and give his side of the story, albeit some of these committee investigations look at the more technical side in terms of Greensill Capital and why it went into administration. That's the firm, obviously, that David Cameron was working for. It'll also look at the type of supply chain finance that David Cameron, who you can see there with Lex Greensill, who ran that business, the type of financing that they did. But no doubt it will touch on his interactions with ministers and lobbying as well. Now, overnight, David Cameron's spokesperson has put out a statement on his behalf in which they've said David Cameron will respond positively to all such requests when the terms of reference of each inquiry are made clear and any invitations to provide evidence are received. While he was an advisor to the business and not a board director, he's keen to ensure that lessons from it going into administration are learned. I think the MPs, as well as looking at the lessons learned from it going bust, probably will be equally keen to learn some lessons from David Cameron's interactions with ministers. I think this will go broader than just the political aspect of this as well. This has also now roped in civil servants, the non-political aspects of government, after those revelations that one civil servant had a paid advisory role at Greensill while working on Whitehall. The Daily Telegraph has similar revelations this morning. And later this morning, we'll also hear from Lord Pickles, Eric Pickles, former Conservative minister known for plain speaking, frankly. He's now the chair of ACOBA, lots of acronyms in all this, that basically scrutinises business appointments for cabinet, for ministers and officials. Lots of criticisms that that body he chairs just doesn't have enough power. I think it'll be very interesting to see whether he thinks the rules now need to change. OK, Rob, thank you. Now, surge testing is beginning in a third London borough this morning after the South African variant was detected there. From today, people who live in the N3 postcode of Finchley or who pass through the area will be asked to get tested. Now, surge testing for the new variant has already started in 3 boroughs of South London: Wandsworth, Lambeth and Southwark. OK, let's talk to Hanisha Sethi, who's outside one of the testing centres in North London. And are we right in thinking that currently there's only sort of 1 case been detected there, but still that's enough to cause this level of concern?
Exactly. Well, this is yet another area of London that will undergo surge testing because the South African variant of COVID-19 has been detected here, and the postcode that will undergo surge testing is N3. So if you live, work or travel through this postcode, it is required, or you are encouraged, to take a test. But officials will be setting up at around 8 a.m. in Finchley Central Station car park. So it is encouraged that you come down, and we are expecting a few queues this morning as well. But officials will also be going door to door, handing out PCR kits as well. So if you are at home, it will be encouraged to take a test there as well. But Monday, of course, since lockdown has been easing, it has been a very busy time in the UK, but especially in Barnet, where people have been going shopping, especially on the high street of Barnet as well. So the government and the local council have said that if you have been shopping on the local high street, that's one of the places where the virus is easily transmissible in congested areas, and you must be encouraged to take a test as well. But we know that surge testing, as you mentioned earlier, has taken place in Wandsworth and Lambeth as well. And it's been a few thousand people have taken the test. The local council has called it a mammoth task because of the volume of people that need to be tested. But it is encouraged to ensure that the virus is contained and it doesn't spread to other boroughs. OK, Hanisha, thank you. Well, let's have a look at the UK's daily COVID figures, and 2,491 new cases of coronavirus have been reported, with 38 more deaths. That brings the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test to 127,161. Another 76,123 people received their first vaccine. 312,685 have had their second dose. That means nearly 40.5 million jabs have been given out across the UK. Now, doctors say pubs and restaurants must improve ventilation as they warn that more must be done to prevent the airborne transmission of COVID-19. A new study in the medical journal, the BMJ, suggests that efforts to stop COVID should focus on tackling close airborne transmission rather than contact with surfaces. Well, let's talk to Dr. Julian Tang, who's clinical virologist at the University of Leicester and who wrote that BMJ report. Good to see you this morning. Look, there's been so much focus to date on hand washing, hand sanitising, all those sort of issues. Have we been getting it wrong?
Hi, morning. So I wouldn't say you're getting it wrong, but I think the emphasis is wrong. So the message hands, face, space, we think should be really space, face, hands. The way this virus transmits, sorry, that's my computer. The way this virus transmits is really through conversational distance, like within 1 meter, when you're talking to a friend or sharing the same air as you're listening to your friend talking. We call it the garlic breath distance. So if you can smell your friend's lunch, you're inhaling some of that air as well as any virus that's inhaled with it. And this is why we say that masking is fine, social distancing is fine, but the indoor airborne environment needs to be improved, and that can be done with ventilation. And that will also improve things like, the common cold each season, as well as, airborne pollution and contaminants like sick building syndrome and allergens like pollen that cause hay fever and work absenteeism every year.
Well, look, I mean, there's been so much... The reason it sounds a bit surprising is there's been so much sort of questioning over the last year as to whether, masks were even necessary. A lot of people very against that. I mean, from the evidence you're putting forward, it would seem masks are the absolute fundamental first step in tackling this.
Yes, and we've seen this in Southeast Asia, where they had SARS 2003 and avian flu and other scares. They started universal masking from the very beginning, back in January. You can see places like Hong Kong, Taiwan, Vietnam, Thailand and Japan, to some extent, have been doing really well in this pandemic without the massive case numbers and deaths and economic fallout we've been seeing in the Western countries where this wasn't practiced. Now I think the Western countries are more experienced with this, they're more aware of this, and that distance, that kind of within 1 meter conversational distance is where all the danger is. And if you think about it, when you talk to people in the street or in corridors or just in over coffee, you don't touch the same surfaces they touch, you don't touch each other. When you take a swab, the viral load is 10 million to 100 million viruses in the swab. Of course, when you breathe it out, you breathe out less viruses in the swab, but you still breathe out 10,000 to 1,000 viruses per breath. And if you're in that distance, within that 1 meter distance, you can smell their breath, what they had for lunch, you're inhaling the virus as well.
In terms of what we do then as we look towards moving things inside from next month, how concerned are you that, I mean, do you think places like pubs and entertainment venues, whatever it might be, are in a position to let people inside in a safe way, in your view?
Yeah, so in the summer months where it's warmer, we did some of this last year as well. If you open windows and keep doors open, you can improve that ventilation naturally. And if you think about it, if you burn your toast in the kitchen, if you open the windows and the back door, it clears very quickly. So if you keep the windows open, even halfway most of the time, then you can improve that ventilation rate in an indoor area, and that reduce the overall airborne concentration that you can actually then reduce the risk of transmission from. So I think this is really a kind of addition to what people are doing, the social distancing, the masking. But if you're indoors having a drink or eating, you can't mask, you can't maintain social distance. So the ventilation becomes much more important proportionally if you're in an indoor space.
Does this follow on then, or at least tie in with the Prime Minister was saying earlier in the week that he thought the huge drop we've had in infections, which has been, very positive. He was saying he thought that was linked to lockdown rather than the vaccine rollout. Does that tie in with your evidence then, with just the reduced contact is making a bigger difference than vaccination?
Yeah, so at the moment, the lockdown is causing the main impact in the reduction of number of cases and deaths. The vaccine rollout is very rapid and encouraging, but we'll see that impact once you start to open up indoor spaces. And if 1 in 2 people have antibodies, that immune barrier will reduce that spread of the virus in an indoor environment where ventilation is poorer and where people are closer together, unmasked, and talking, breathing the same air. So I think the Prime Minister is correct in that respect.
I mean, but you see, it almost seems, and I know you're not a doom merchant, as it were. We've talked many times before, but it does seem quite a dispiriting sort of message in the sense that all these businesses, desperate to sort of get back to normal, desperate to restart the economy, you seem to be saying, at least for many months to come, there are going to have to be some pretty severe restrictions because of the airborne nature of this.
Yes, but we've been doing that most of the year already. The social distancing, at least the attempt to maintain social distance in supermarkets, the masking supermarkets. Improving the ventilation is not an overnight thing, and a lot of places you can't open the windows or keep the doors open, easily because of security issues. But if the concept is there, if the kind of will is there to improve ventilation over time, those improvements will come in gradually, and that's what we expect. Improving infrastructure in buildings is a very difficult thing, and it costs money. But if you look at the cost-benefit over time, and this virus will become seasonal over many years, and not everybody will take the vaccine, not everybody will respond to the vaccine, and there'll be new variants appearing all the time that escape the vaccines. This is a kind of backup to everything else we're doing to maintain that degree of safety that we're all looking for.
OK. Julian Tang, it's good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, still to come this morning at 20 to 8, we're going to hear from Hospitality UK about how pubs and restaurants in England have fared so far since reopening on Monday and what more they need to do to ensure the spread of coronavirus is limited. We'll mention to her about what Dr Tang is saying about extra ventilation in venues. At 7:45, I'll talk to the Labour MP Jess Phillips about the campaign to remember the lives of women killed by men through a series of commemorative portraits. And at 8:05, we're talking to Sir John Bell from the UK's Vaccines Task Force to discuss the latest with vaccine safety and the ongoing rollout. Now, the US climate envoy John Kerry has arrived in China on his visit to discuss international efforts to tackle climate change, despite the tense relationship between the countries at the moment. It comes ahead of President Biden hosting a climate summit next week and the COP26 conference here in the UK in November. Well, our Asia correspondent Tom Cheshire joins us now. And do we expect any progress to be made by Mr Kerry's visit? Because we know that China has got a very long way to go when it comes to tackling climate issues.
Yeah, we don't know exactly what's going to be on the table down in Shanghai. The fact this visit is happening, first of all, is very interesting by itself. The relations are incredibly bad between China and the US at the moment. But the Biden administration has said all the way from the beginning that it's willing to cooperate with China on climate change. It sees that as separate from other issues that are causing a lot of friction, like Taiwan, like Xinjiang, like Hong Kong. It wants to talk about climate change without that being conditional. China has hinted it might want to see it as more tied to this. It wants to see progress on other issues before it talks about climate change. But we'll find out more about that. As you say, China is the biggest emitter in the world, so there is a lot to do. But it does know it has a problem. I'm here in Ningxia in northwest China, and it doesn't look like much really here, but what this is really the biggest ecological migration project in the world. This village has been built to take people from other parts of this province where there isn't enough water supply, where there's a lot of drought, and move them here because they are feeling the effects of climate change already. So they do know there's a problem. They are taking these sort of localized solutions, but the big question really for China is about its use of coal. It keeps adding coal power stations, incredibly dirty source of fuel. We've seen that a lot as part of its post-COVID recovery, focusing on heavy industry. Until China gets off coal, we're going to still have a very big problem in terms of emissions. I think that's going to be one of the issues very much on the table when John Kerry goes to Shanghai and meets with his counterparts. The question is, of course, what China will ask of the US in return.
OK, Tom, thank you. Well, just a reminder that you can keep up to stories like this on our daily climate show here on Sky News. It's every weekday at 6:30 and 9:30. OK, let's have a look at some of the other stories making the news for you today. And newspaper reports today suggest members of the royal family will not be wearing military uniform at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. It's understood the Queen decided that senior royals attending the service on Saturday should be in civilian clothing. It means Prince Harry and Prince Andrew, who both stepped down from royal duties, will not have to face being the only family members not in uniform. And Sky News will have full coverage of Prince Philip's funeral throughout the day on Saturday, with a special programme starting at 12:30. There'll also be live coverage on Sky One from 2:45. Now, there have been more protests in Minnesota overnight, but without the levels of violence seen in recent days. Hundreds of people again took to the streets to protest about the shooting dead of 20-year-old Daunte Wright by a police officer. The officer involved has now been charged with second-degree manslaughter. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, the trial of Derek Chauvin continues, the former officer charged with George Floyd's murder. Our US correspondent Sally Lockwood reports now from Minneapolis.
A fourth night of unrest in a city on edge, seeking justice for George Floyd, and now seething at another death at the hands of police. The shooting of Daunte Wright would have caused outrage regardless, but it couldn't have come at a worse time for this community.
They bring a lot of hate to this world. And it has nothing to do with you or you, but it's just that, how do we stand up without hurting you or you?
20-year-old Dante Wright was shot during a routine traffic stop on Sunday. The police were quick to release body cam footage showing the moment they claimed the officer shot him by accident. And 3 days later, Officer Kim Potter has been charged with second-degree manslaughter. A much faster response than after the death of George Floyd. But many here feel nothing's changed.
There's no way you can mistake a taser for a gun.
Not if you've been on the field for
Point
26 years. I can't see that. 26
Especially
years?
if you're a veteran police.
Yeah, 26
That's not
years.
okay.
The decision to charge Officer Kim Potter so quickly is undoubtedly a bid to try and calm this community. But many here are still unhappy that she resigned instead of being fired. And many simply don't buy the police explanation that she fired her handgun instead of her taser by accident. It's added to tension here amid the trial of former officer Derek Chauvin for the death of George Floyd. The defence continues to present its case, arguing his restraint of Mr. Floyd was an appropriate use of force, with a former medical examiner testifying exhaust fumes, drugs and a heart condition caused his death.
Mr. Floyd had a sudden cardiac arrhythmia due to his atherosclerotic and hypertensive heart disease. He would have the toxicology, the fentanyl and methamphetamine. There is exposure to a vehicle exhaust. All of those combined to cause Mr. Floyd's death.
Even before a verdict for the death of George Floyd, an all too familiar story has begun again here. Another intersection, another death, another shrine, the same city. Sally Lockwood, Sky News, Minneapolis.
Now, more than 80 British universities have been flagged on a website for students who share incidents of sexual abuse and harassment. Some of the UK's top institutions, including Oxford and Exeter, have been mentioned more than 50 times on Everyone's Invited to highlight allegations of rape culture. Denmark has become the first country to stop using the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine altogether because of concerns about blood clots. AstraZeneca said it respected Denmark's choice. The UK medicines regulator continues to say the benefits of the vaccine outweigh any risks. A new study suggests the psychedelic compound found in magic mushrooms may be at least as effective as leading antidepressants in treating depression. Psilocybin, which is found in the mushrooms, was compared with a 6-week course of the drug escitalopram, and reductions in depression scores happened quicker in the psilocybin group and in greater magnitude. Now, if you're a fan of all-out politics, this may be for you. This is a member of the Canadian Parliament who was caught naked on a virtual House of Commons meeting. It's William Amos, who's 46, and he represents the Quebec district of Pontiac. He has since apologised in an email to his colleagues, saying he'd been changing into his work clothes after going for a jog. Quite why he did that in front of a camera, I mean, who knows? But thankfully, he had his phone with him in a very handy place, so that's all good. Now, the Scottish traveller community is demanding an apology from the Scottish Government over claims of historical mistreatment dating back to the 1940s. The Tinker experiment saw families torn apart and placed in inadequate housing, a scheme supported by the UK Government and Scottish local authorities. Our Scotland correspondent, James Matthews, reports.
They were the subjects of the so-called Tinker experiment. They call it eugenics, social engineering over decades that separated families and ruined lives.
I was born in an experiment and had no say in the matter.
In a clearing in a Perthshire forest is the gypsy traveller community Seamus McPhee was born into 50 years ago. Then it was one location of many for the Tinker experiment. Primitive huts, seen here after they were occupied, built to encourage gypsy travellers away from a nomadic existence and towards settled society. But all executed with sinister intent, according to Seamus.
To demolish and eradicate gypsy culture and to effect a form of cultural genocide. And it was part of a punitive series of measures, a drive against or series of purges against gypsy travellers with a view to making them conform.
The Tinker experiment led to some families being broken up. If a family outgrew the accommodation it was given, children could be taken into care.
The damage is done, it won't be repaired.
Teresa was one of those children. Even before she and her twin brother were born, they were earmarked for removal from the family home. Her brother died in middle age, an alcoholic. Teresa blames a lifelong trauma rooted in his childhood experience.
It had a terrible impact on his life. He's the one that suffered the most because he couldn't cope with it.
There were several thousand people involved in the so-called Tinker experiments, which lasted over many years. In recent years, those involved have sought a formal apology from the Scottish Government, which hasn't been forthcoming. A spokesperson said, "We accept the lives of many gypsy travellers have been blighted by historical policies and practices of councils and charities, and we absolutely recognise the devastating and lasting impact this had. We must now focus on working together to deliver the actions to address the inequality and injustice that this community continues to face." It's a government's stated intention to get things right, if not the apology sought for an experiment gone wrong. James Matthews, Sky News in Perthshire.
Well, this is Sky News Breakfast. Let's check in on the weather for you this morning with Kirsty. Good morning. What have we got today?
Good morning, Stephen. We've got some sunshine today, very welcome sunshine. It feels quite warm in the strong sunshine this time of year, but some rather chilly nights, so still frost to watch out for if you're a keen gardener.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. High pressure dominating our weather over the next few days. So for most of us, that means some fine, dry and settled weather, but it is rather chilly at night. So a widespread frost this morning, but temperatures will start to recover fairly quickly in that strong sunshine. It is dry just about everywhere. The exception will be across parts of East Anglia, Essex and Kent, where we've got that northeasterly wind driving in a few showers here. So eastern England, later down towards parts of the southeast, we'll start to see a few more showers as the day goes on with that brisk northeasterly wind pushing them in. So it's cooler and cloudier with the potential for a few showers here, but elsewhere, feeling quite pleasant in the sunshine in the afternoon with light winds, temperatures peaking around 13 or 14 in the sheltered spots across western Scotland. Through the night tonight, it's going to be another chilly one, though, with another widespread frost.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Kirsty, thank you. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, we'll hear from Hospitality UK about how pubs and restaurants have fared so far since their outdoor reopening in England.
The wind was like pulling us out of that little room.
Mandatory evacuation!
I'm Greg Milam, Sky's US correspondent here in Los Angeles. It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
This gives
gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir.
You need to leave. You're not understanding.
I've seen the dark side of America. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've seen heartbreaking human stories. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
Now, more than 112,000 people affected by brain tumours have signed a petition calling on the government to fund research to help find a cure. The hope is to bring funding to the same level as breast cancer and leukemia. Well, let's talk to Eddie Adams, who was diagnosed with a brain tumour in 2017. Look, it's good to see you this morning. I mean, this must have been devastating news at the time. Just how did this come about? How did you find out what was going on?
So I was living in Brighton at the time, and I had a seizure one day all of a sudden, and got rushed into hospital. They did a CT scan, and they told me that I had a brain tumour.
And so what happened then? What happens in terms of treatment after that?
So the treatment can be quite invasive, as you can probably tell. I had, unfortunately, complications, which most people don't have. But essentially what they do is they strap you down to like an operating table. They cut open a hole in your skull, and then they wake you back up to operate on your brain, because they need to know when they're touching the wrong bits, and when they're cutting out the tumour, they can go a bit too far, for example, and so they need to hear you speaking in order to understand which part of the brain they're touching. Then it was about, I don't know, it's 12 weeks of radiation, I think, temozolomide, which is an oral chemotherapy. I actually decided not to do that, purely because I've always been a bit more concerned about the quality of life rather than the quantity. And, you know, the temozolomide does make you quite sick. So I figured to hell with it.
So where does that leave you in terms of prognosis then?
Well, there's about... I'm quite an optimistic person, and I'll find a silver lining in most things, but there is about a 12% chance that I won't be here this time next year.
Oh, heck. Look, what is stunning and frightening in all of this is when you look at the figures that brain tumours kill more children and adults under the age of 40 than any other cancer, but they get only about 1% of the national spend on cancer research. That absolutely astounds me.
I genuinely think it is a national scandal that it's been going on this long. You know, 1% is not a great deal, especially considering it is one of the most deadly forms of cancer that there is. And, you know, the treatment that I had was the same treatment that you would have had 20 years ago, to be honest with you. And, you know, unless the government decides to have parity of funding, it's going to be another 20 years before they start getting other treatment options.
I mean, a big issue with this also has to be awareness as well, because we know, I mean, the breast cancer campaigns that have been held that have had such publicity, and understandably so, has created a huge increase in funding and donations. I mean, I guess just you talking about this could actually begin to make a difference.
Well, I hope so. I mean, you know, I think it is an important, you know, again, it's the parity of funding that really is the most important thing. You know, awareness is fine, but you know, the research needs to be done and it needs to be funded properly.
Yeah. Look, how do you stay so optimistic? I mean, you're a young man. You're only in your sort of early 30s, aren't you?
I've got no idea. You know, yeah, I'm 32 now, living with my mother and a hole in my head. It is difficult to be optimistic, and I'm often not optimistic, but, you know, you can present that way.
Yeah, well, so what about the downtimes then? I mean, what level of support do you get? Are there organisations and charities that are there to assist people with brain tumours?
There are. Macmillan are really fantastic. And, you know, actually with the brain tumour research charity, which I found, you know, really, we didn't even know a great deal about it until we started speaking to the brain tumour research charity, and they're fantastic. And they've done this report that is going to be sent to Parliament today. I urge all of the people who are watching this to contact their local MP and say that you support this funding parity of funding, sorry, and you want to see something happen.
Yeah, well, look, you put forward a very strong case. Eddie, keep smiling when you can.
I will do, darling.
OK, you be good. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Do you know, it's heartbreaking, isn't it? I mean, 32. I'm 47, and so 32 to me seems very young, but honestly, it takes you back. Now, new figures suggest pubs, restaurants and bars, which were able to reopen in England on Monday, saw levels of sales double compared to before the coronavirus pandemic. Well, same time last year, so we're sort of technically in lockdown, I think, at that stage. But research from the CGA Food and Drink Insight show like-for-like drink sales jumped by 113.8% on the first day of outdoor trading compared with the same day in 2019. So let's talk to the Chief Executive of UK Hospitality, Kate Nichols. Good morning. I mean, you must be pleased with the figures.
We're very pleased. It's a signal of a positive start, that people are keen to come back out, socialise with family and friends in a safe environment. There are a couple of notes of caution to these figures, however. This is just one day's trading for a start, and it only relates to those premises that were able to open. So 2/3 of our premises didn't open on Monday and won't be opening until May. So this is just for the cohort that were able to open their doors. And obviously, even then, even these positive figures, it's a psychological and a positive opening, but it's not an economic one, because for those figures to be as they are, they're still only generating 20% of their normal revenue, so well below break even. But it is a good signal that people will come back and that consumer pent-up demand is there.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I mean, comparing it like for the same day when we were in lockdown last year, it does sort of distort those figures somewhat, doesn't it? Look, how difficult is it? Obviously, as you say, so many venues are still closed, but does this offer some level of sort of hope, a bit of light at the end of the tunnel for those venues, that they can at least start to see a reasonable return when things open for them next month?
I think that's the main sign of hope that we get from these figures. The concern had been that after being locked down for best part of 5 months, effectively, that consumer demand was not going to be there, that consumer confidence was not going to be there to come back out to venues when people have been at home for such a long period of time. But what we have seen is that our message of reassurance that these venues are safe, and it's a safe place to socialise, has got through, and that people are keen to come back out. So that gives us hope for the future, but it's still going to be a long road for recovery for many of these businesses to build up. And until we ease those social distancing restrictions on the 21st of June, these businesses will be open but not trading at a profit. So it's really keen that the government confirms the roadmap now and confirms that it's going to move ahead and end social distancing restrictions on the 21st of June.
And yet we've had new research out today. We spoke to Dr. Julian Tang behind some of this new research in the BMJ, saying there's actually much more concern now about airborne transmission of COVID-19 rather than transmission by touch. Now, that raises very serious implications for pubs and restaurants to reopen and to have people inside without those limited numbers for perhaps quite some time to come.
Well, this is one of the areas that we have worked on over the course of the last year, and it's included in our protocols for reopening. And now, thankfully, it's included also in government guidance. We've always worked really hard on maintaining that ventilation is a key mitigating risk against COVID. Legally, restaurants and kitchens are required to meet building standards of good ventilation. Our guidance and best practice that came out last year talks about throwing open doors and windows in smaller venues that don't have mechanical ventilation standards. So we can make sure that ventilation is good in our premises, that we are well ventilated. That reduces the risk even further. And so we've already been addressing this for the last year, and government guidance, as I say now, it also includes it. So it's a measure that our ventilation standards actually are higher in many kitchens and restaurants than they are in hospitals and education settings.
Look, there's been some concern voiced in some of the newspapers today, actually, from theatre venues, saying that they fear with the looking forward to reopening, but with the limited capacity they're going to have, it could still all be basically head towards closure. I mean, that is still going to... I mean, presumably that threat applies to hospitality as well, that, this isn't now an open door to success for a lot of your venues.
Absolutely not. And we have the same issues that theatres, live music venues, cinemas all have. We can be open, but we're not open economically. And we know from last year, with all the social distancing restrictions, the capacity caps, the 1 metre plus distancing, the restriction on the number of visitors, the best we were doing last year for 1 week was to break even. Most of our venues are trading at a loss at 60% of normal revenue. So until we find a way of moving past that social distancing restrictions and allowing these businesses to open freely, they will be making a loss, and it'll be a long shadow that COVID casts. The industry will have economic long COVID over it for a long period of time, which may yet mean that many more venues are failing, many more businesses fail, and jobs will be lost until we can get through that period, get social distancing lifted as planned and as promised by the government on the 21st of June.
OK, good to talk to you. Thank you. Now, still to come on Sky News Breakfast, I'm going to be talking to the Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding, Jess Phillips, about a series of portraits to commemorate women killed by men in the UK.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Southeast Asia correspondent in Bangkok. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion has just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us. We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people and putting them into trucks.
You either live and recover, or you die.
OK, so that's like a war.
That's the war, yes.
We help you understand the world with us. For the past 24 hours, the soldiers have been attacked on a number of occasions.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We're being crushed.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. They were convinced the United States would become hooked. Well, they were right.
We hear shotguns being fired and also tear gas is being put around.
The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world.
It's not out of control, but they've withdrawn. It's so hot.
For the early risers.
As we examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers, the curious, and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage, Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to Sophie Ridge on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.
Did you know that if we make small changes to our lives, we can reduce air pollution by loads? But how much? Exactly, loads.
Hello there. For many, it's a chilly start this morning, but dry with long spells of sunshine to come and fairly light winds as well. There will be a scattering of showers and a brisk northeasterly across parts of East Anglia and southeast England, but otherwise temperatures peaking at around 12 or 13 Celsius. Now, we're expecting low levels of air pollution across the UK and Ireland through Thursday as these cool conditions persist. The showers in the southeast also keeping the levels low. Little change expected as we head into the weekend, so low levels of air pollution across the board.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Now, over the last year in the UK, 118 women and girls were killed by men. It is a figure that is so shocking. The MP, Jess Phillips, read out the name of every victim in the House of Commons on International Women's Day last month. Now, one illustrator has responded by creating portraits of every victim to remember them and make their stories visible. Enda Brady reports.
Kelly Fitzgibbons was one of 118 women killed by a man over the course of 12 months in the UK. She was shot dead by her partner, who also killed their two little girls, Ava, who was 4, and Lexi, who was 2. Their 3 lives were erased in a matter of seconds.
I met Kelly and her twin sister Emma at the youth club just there when we were all 13.
Sue Redman was Kelly's best friend and often comes to this memorial bench where they first met as schoolgirls in Bolsham in West Sussex to think about her.
It's so important purely because it's raised our awareness. We had no idea until someone gave us the heads up that Kelly's name had been read out in the House of Commons. We had absolutely no idea of the number of women. I wouldn't even have thought there were that many murders in the UK per year, let alone women murdered at the hands of men. It's just truly shocking, and it's very, very right what Jess Phillips has done.
In this place,
on International Women's Day, Labour MP Jess Phillips read out in Parliament the names of all the women killed by men over the course of a year in Britain.
Kelly Fitzgibbons, killed alongside her 2 daughters.
Artist Henny Beaumont saw that speech and decided to paint a portrait of every single woman.
I was obviously hugely saddened, but I was also really shocked that actually the only name I recognised at that point was Sarah Everard. And actually she wasn't on the list yet, but she did mention her name. And it just made me think, you know, it made me curious in a way about who all these other women were and why we didn't know them.
Kelly's twin sister has set up a charitable foundation in her name to provide support and legal advice to families whose loved ones die in traumatic circumstances. Henny says the aim of her work is to remember, honour and make all these women visible. Enda Brady, Sky News.
Well, Jess Phillips joins us now. Good to see you this morning. How important is it that these women and their lives are being not only commemorated, but you know, really brought to the forefront of our consciousness once again?
It's really important to me. I think as a policymaker, it's very, very difficult to try and get across the enormity of some of the things that we have to do in politics and in Westminster. And we forget often that lines on paper and big numbers that are read out on the news, and we forget that what we're talking about when we talk about politics is we're talking about people, the people in our country. And for somebody who focuses on domestic abuse, the sheer numbers of people murdered, of victims in this country, of children living in domestic abuse situations, often those big numbers mean that people find it very difficult to actually comprehend. And so breaking it down and hearing from people like Kelly's family and the pictures that Henny has been doing, they breathe life into something that people need to realise was people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, we talk. I have to talk numbers every day, and you almost get used to it, don't you? Which is horrific in a way. And I find it difficult when we have to talk to the relatives of victims or people who've passed away. And it is, as you say, all about this thing that these are people with lives and histories and families.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes the most maddening thing about politics is that you'll sit opposite, and I'm sure that the opposition would say the same about me. You sit opposite people and you're desperately trying to get them to see your constituents or see these particular cases. And the reality is that the business of government often dehumanises people. But I spend every day, I mean, Kelly's sister, actually, Kelly from that piece that you just showed, she's a resident in Birmingham. She lives very near me. And I've spoken to her family on the telephone. I spend my time speaking to the families of these women. And many of the women who've been killed since I read that list, whose names I'll have to read next year, their families get in touch with me. And each and every one honestly thinks that their case is like an isolated case, that this doesn't happen to other people. And until we make those connections and get the government to really take that up and understand that these aren't isolated incidents, this is a pattern that we have to do something about, then I'm afraid I'm going to keep on reading out many, many names.
Well, look, I mean, I thought it was really interesting that in Enda's report there, you know, Kelly's best friend from school obviously knew what happened to her friend and to her friend's two daughters. When you read out 118 names, was astounded. She was astounded. She thought there weren't even that many murders in the UK in a year, never mind just of murders of women by men.
Yeah, and I think that's the reality. And I think in the light of the Sarah Everard case, where I believe that some of the terminology to try and understandably make people feel at ease, they said, oh, you know, it's vanishingly rare that this thing happens. But in reality, a woman is murdered at the hands of men every 3 days in the United Kingdom. And I'm afraid to say that at the moment, it's women killed by men is at its highest rate since 2006 and has been rising every year. So this is a problem that is getting worse. And the reality of the situation for lots of victims of domestic violence is that the threat of murder, the threat that somebody will kill you if you try and escape, if you speak up, if you do anything or say anything, that is a pattern that we see not just in 118 cases. I'm afraid that pattern is being perpetrated across the country today in up to nearly 1 million homes.
So how important is it then for, I mean, not only to raise public awareness of what is going on by what you've done and what Henny is doing with her artwork, but also for those women who are in these very difficult situations to know that they are not alone. I mean, I know it's a grim outlook for them in some respects to see people who've died, but to know that they're not alone, they're not absolutely isolated in what they're going through.
It's the most important thing that we actually do in anyone with a platform, anyone on the media, anyone in politics, anyone. to speak about this issue when women at home now are right now listening to this and feeling that their life is represented. And it might not be that they feel that today is the day that they can break away, but every single day my inbox, and today will be no different, will fill up with people saying thank you, because that is what my life is like. This is what I have to put up with. And making those women realise that there is help, that they are not alone, that then the things that their abuser is telling them, that they're wrong, that no one will listen, that they won't be believed, they'll be deported, that those things that we as a state, we will try and do everything to swoop in and help that woman. Now, the trouble is that as a society still, and I'm afraid to say that the domestic abuse bill is today, and we will be putting to the government some of the things that we wish to see changed, is that for too many women who come forward, still there is not a good enough response because there isn't enough resource in the system. So that's the issue we've got to fight.
Jess Phillips, it's really good to talk to you this morning. Thank you. And look, if you are affected by any of the issues that Jess was talking about, you want to speak to someone, you are not alone. You can call the National Domestic Abuse Helpline 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Their number is 0808 2000 247. 0808 2000 247.